You're a freeloader, my son shouted at the Christmas dinner table in my own home where he lived at my expense. His wife nodded coldly, supporting his betrayal. The guests froze in shock when I calmly replied, "You have until morning to leave." The next day, the police knocked on the door. The front door clicked shut behind me, and Ethan's voice cut through the warm glow of Christmas lights before I'd even removed my coat. "Finally showed up. Thought you got lost in your book sorting again." He sprawled across my leather recliner like he owned it, phone screen reflecting the tree lights as his thumb scrolled endlessly. Didn't even glance up. 9 months of this. 9 months of coming home to find him claiming my space, my chair, my peace. I hung my coat carefully in the hall closet. Water droplets from melted snow pattering onto the hardwood. The library volunteer shift had run late. Mrs. Hargrove needed help with the holiday returns, but I'd hurried through the December cold to get home for Christmas Eve. "Good evening." I stepped into the living room, adjusting my sweater. "How are preparations for tomorrow going?" Sophia emerged from the kitchen archway, dish towel in hand, back deliberately turned toward me. Her auburn hair was pulled into a tight ponytail that made her look younger than 35, more like the college student Ethan had married, rather than the woman who'd been living in my house since May. "We'll handle tomorrow ourselves." Ethan's tone carried that familiar edge of dismissal. "Don't need your help." The fireplace crackled softly, casting dancing shadows across the room. I'd arranged the Christmas decorations myself 4 weeks ago. Garland along the mantel, the ceramic nativity my late wife Eleanor had collected piece by piece. Stockings hung with care, everything in its proper place. Everything except the family beneath them. "Everything's under control," Sophia added without turning, her voice flat as winter pavement. I moved toward the fireplace, straightening a slightly askew ornament on the tree. The silver bell chimed softly at my touch. Control. What an interesting word choice. I wondered whose control she meant. "The Millers are excited about tomorrow," Ethan continued, finally looking up from his phone. "Mary's bringing her famous potato salad." The words hit like ice water. Millers tomorrow. I wasn't aware we were having guests. Ethan's eyebrows lifted in mock surprise. "Oh, didn't we mention it?" "Yeah. John and Mary are coming, and Evelyn from next door. Victor from my old job, too." He waved his hand dismissively. "Just a few people." My fingers tightened around the ornament. Just a few people in my house at my table, using my dishes, drinking my wine, eating food purchased with my pension money. "When did this get decided? Last week sometime?" Ethan shrugged, already looking back at his phone. "Sophia sent out the invites. You were probably at the library." "Of course, I was at the library. I volunteered there every Tuesday and Thursday. Had for 4 years since retirement. They knew my schedule. They'd planned around my absence." The Christmas tree lights blurred slightly as I stared at them. Red, green, gold. Colors that should have meant warmth and celebration. Instead, they felt like decorations in someone else's house, someone else's life. "How many people exactly? 7, maybe 8. Sophia finally spoke, her back still turned. "Nothing fancy. Nothing fancy except the fancy groceries I'd noticed appearing in my refrigerator over the past week. The expensive wine bottles on the counter. The premium turkey that cost twice what I usually spent." Ethan stretched in my chair, his feet propped on the coffee table I'd refinished myself last spring. The same coffee table that now bore water rings from glasses he never used coasters for. "Don't worry, old man. We've got it handled." Old man. The phrase settled in my chest like a cold stone. 68 wasn't old. Retired wasn't useless. This was still my house, my home, my life. Wasn't it I straightened another ornament? This one a small wooden angel Eleanor had painted herself. The delicate brushstrokes reminded me of her careful hands, her gentle way of making everything beautiful. She would have been gracious about unexpected guests. She would have smiled and welcomed them, and somehow made magic happen. But Eleanor wasn't here, hadn't been here for 5 years, and I wasn't Eleanor. Well, I said quietly, I suppose I should get out of your way then. Good idea. Ethan's attention had already returned to his phone. We've got last-minute stuff to finish. I stood there for another moment, watching my son scroll through whatever absorbed him more than basic courtesy. Watching my daughter-in-law move efficiently through my kitchen like she was the homeowner. Listening to the fire crackle in the fireplace, where I had spent countless quiet evenings, reading, thinking, remembering. The stairs creaked under my weight as I climbed them, each step taking me further from the life happening in my living room and closer to the refuge of my bedroom. Behind me, I heard Sophia's voice, though not her words. Something about tablecloths and seating arrangements. My hand found the banister Eleanor had polished every Saturday for 25 years. The bedroom door closed with a soft click, muffling the voices downstairs. I stood there for a moment, hands still on the doorknob, listening to the muted sounds of preparation happening without me. Sophia's footsteps crossed the kitchen. Ethan's voice rose briefly, then faded. I removed my shoes, placing them precisely beside the bed, and settled into the reading chair by the window. Snow continued falling outside. Each flake caught momentarily in the glow of the streetlight before disappearing into darkness. The Harrisons' house across the street blazed with Christmas lights, multicolored strands outlining every window, every doorframe, an inflatable Santa waving mechanically from their front yard. My desk drawer slid open with the familiar scrape of wood against wood. Inside, beneath retirement papers and utility bills, lay the photo albums I rarely touched anymore. Eleanor organizing them had been one of her quiet joys. Everything chronological, labeled, preserved. The first album fell open to our wedding day, Eleanor in white lace, radiant despite the courthouse setting we'd chosen for budget reasons. My younger self stood beside her in a borrowed suit, both of us grinning like we'd won the lottery. In a way, we had. I turned the page. Ethan at 6 months, chubby cheeks and bright eyes, reaching for the camera with tiny fists. Eleanor had captured every milestone. First steps, first words, first day of school. Ethan building blanket forts in this very room when he was 8. Ethan at graduation, cap slightly askew, diploma held high, pride beaming from every pore. The next photo stopped me cold. Ethan at 28, the year he'd gotten the assistant manager position at the furniture store. He'd called that night, voice electric with excitement. Dad, I did it. I'm finally getting somewhere. Where had that young man gone? The one who'd worked double shifts, who'd saved for months to buy Sophia's engagement ring, who'd spoken about building a life instead of borrowing one. 9 months ago, he'd shown up at my door with 2 suitcases and a sob story about temporary setbacks. Just for a couple weeks, Dad, until we get back on our feet. The furniture store had laid him off in April. Budget cuts, they'd said. Sophia's hours at the salon had been reduced to part-time. They'd maxed out their credit cards, keeping up appearances, that car payment on Ethan's truck, the apartment rent, dinners out 3 times a week because Sophia claimed she was too tired to cook. I'd said yes. Of course. They were family. You help family. But help was supposed to be a bridge, not a permanent residence. Downstairs, something heavy dropped. Sophia's voice carried up, sharp with irritation. Ethan's response was muffled, but dismissive. The same tone he'd used with me earlier. The same tone he'd been using for months. I reached for the small notebook I kept in the drawer. Eleanor had teased me about my lists, my calculations, my need to track everything. You engineer the grocery shopping. Clarence, she'd laughed. But the numbers didn't lie. Utility bills up 42% since May. Grocery costs doubled. Water usage tripled thanks to Sophia's hour-long showers and Ethan's insistence on running the dishwasher daily, whether it was full or not. Last week, I'd seen the credit card bill Ethan left on the kitchen counter. $280 at the electronics store. $350 at the mall. While I clipped coupons and bought generic brands to make ends meet. He was purchasing wireless headphones and designer jeans. The notebook pages filled with calculations. 9 months of increased expenses. 9 months of watching my retirement savings dwindle while supporting 2 adults who seemed to have forgotten what responsibility meant. Eleanor's photograph smiled at me from the album. She'd always seen the best in Ethan, defended his choices when I worried about his spending habits or his tendency to take shortcuts. He's finding his way, she'd said. Everyone finds their way differently. But this wasn't finding a way. This was taking the easy path, the one paved with someone else's sacrifices. A door slammed downstairs. Ethan's voice rose, not quite loud enough to make out words, but clear enough to convey frustration. Sophia's response was sharper. I closed the photo album and returned it to the drawer. The notebook went back, too, alongside the growing stack of evidence that my generosity had become an enablement, that my son had mistaken kindness for weakness. The bedroom felt smaller, somehow, cramped by the weight of realization. My sanctuary had become a retreat, my own home, a place where I hid from people who should have been grateful for my help. Outside, the snow continued falling. The Harrisons' mechanical Santa waved cheerfully at no one in particular. Across the neighborhood, families were finishing their Christmas Eve preparations, gathering around trees, sharing anticipation for morning. I was spending mine calculating the cost of my own kindness. The house grew quieter as the evening wore on. But the quiet felt different now. Not peaceful, expectant, like the pause before a storm. I changed into pajamas, brushed my teeth, completed the small rituals that had anchored my days since Eleanor's death. Routine had been my salvation then, the thin thread that held life together. When grief threatened to unravel everything, now routine felt like surrender, a quiet acceptance of being pushed to the margins of my own life. The bed welcomed me with familiar comfort, but sleep felt distant. Downstairs, footsteps crossed the floor, a cabinet door closed. The refrigerator hummed open and shut. Ethan and Sophia were still awake, still planning their party, their celebration, in my house, with my resources, at my expense. Tomorrow would bring guests I hadn't invited, conversations I hadn't chosen, a performance of family happiness while my actual family treated me like a landlord and not even a respected one. The snow tapped gently against the window, and I listened to it like a countdown. Christmas morning arrived with the sound of clattering pans and running water. I woke naturally. No alarm needed. My internal clock had kept engineer's hours for 42 years. Through the bedroom window, snow covered the yard in pristine white, unmarked, except for rabbit tracks near the fence. The hallway was warm as I descended the stairs, heated by kitchen activity below. Sophia's voice drifted up, talking to someone on the phone about timing and side dishes. Her tone was animated, more energetic than I'd heard in months. Told them 7 o'clock sharp. Yes, Mary, I know your potato salad needs to chill. Just bring it whenever. I reached the kitchen doorway and stopped. The scene before me looked like preparation for a restaurant opening, not a casual Christmas dinner. Sophia stood at the stove, phone pressed between her shoulder and ear, simultaneously basting what appeared to be a 22-pound turkey and stirring something in a large pot. The countertops groaned under an array of dishes I didn't recognize. Crystal serving bowls, silver platters, cloth napkins still in their packaging. "Good morning," I said. She glanced over her shoulder, barely pausing in her orchestrated dance between oven and stovetop. "Morning. Coffee's fresh." The dining room table, visible through the archway, had been transformed. My simple oak table now wore a cream tablecloth I'd never seen before. Place settings for 9 people gleamed under the chandelier. The good china I'd stored in the attic since Eleanor's funeral, apparently retrieved and arranged without my knowledge. 9 people, not 7 or 8, as Ethan had mentioned. 9. "Sophia, how many people did you invite?" Ethan handled the invitations, she said without turning around this time, focused on arranging what looked like 3 different types of bread in a wicker basket. I counted place settings again. 9 plates, 9 sets of silverware, 9 wine glasses, the centerpiece, an elaborate arrangement of pine boughs, red berries, and gold ribbon. Cost more than I typically spent on groceries in a week. It would have been nice to know the exact number. "It's Christmas. Friends are coming." Her tone suggested the conversation was over. The refrigerator revealed more surprises. 2 bottles of expensive wine, a cheese platter covered in plastic wrap, shrimp arranged on a serving tray. The vegetables were premium quality, asparagus bundles tied with twine, baby potatoes, ingredients for what appeared to be homemade cranberry sauce. Ethan emerged from the living room, hair tousled, wearing the same clothes from yesterday. He headed straight for the coffee pot without acknowledging me. "Your mother and I used to cook Christmas dinner together," I said to his back. "Simple meal. Just family." "Well, this isn't just family anymore." He poured coffee into my favorite mug, the blue ceramic one Eleanor had given me for my 60th birthday. "We thought you'd want to celebrate properly. As if my quiet Christmases with Eleanor had been somehow inadequate. Who exactly is coming? Ethan rattled off names like items on a shopping list. John and Mary Miller, obviously. Evelyn from next door. Victor Brown from the store. His girlfriend Grace. Maybe Nathan from down the street if he doesn't have to work. He paused, thinking. Oh, and Sophia's sister might drive down from Seattle. 9 potential guests had become 10 in my house, eating food purchased with my pension money. This seems like quite an undertaking for a casual Christmas dinner. Sophia finally turned around, wooden spoon in hand, face flushed from kitchen heat. "We wanted to do something special, show people how grateful we are for..." She gestured vaguely around the kitchen. "For everything. Grateful." The word felt hollow, coming from someone who'd been treating my home like her personal domain for 9 months. The turkey alone must have cost $70. "We wanted quality," Ethan said, defensive. "Now, you always taught me not to cut corners." True, I had taught him that in the context of work, of building things to last, of taking pride in craftsmanship. Not in the context of spending someone else's money on impressive displays. The kitchen timer chimed. Sophia spun back to the oven, pulling out a tray of what appeared to be homemade rolls. The smell was admittedly magnificent. Yeast and butter and warmth that belonged in a family magazine photo. "What time are people arriving around 2?" Ethan answered. "Gives us time to finish prep and get cleaned up." 5 hours. 5 hours until my quiet home would fill with virtual strangers, until my living room became a stage for Ethan and Sophia's performance of successful hosting. I refilled my coffee mug, a different one since Ethan had claimed mine, and retreated to the living room. The Christmas tree looked smaller somehow, dwarfed by folding chairs that had been retrieved from the basement and arranged in a semicircle. My reading chair had been pushed against the wall to make room for the expanded seating arrangement. Through the kitchen doorway, I watched Sophia move with purposeful efficiency, Ethan occasionally stirring something or opening wine to let it breathe. They worked together like a team, comfortable in their shared project. When had they planned this? How many conversations had happened around my absence? How many decisions made without consulting the person who would pay for them? The house phone rang. Ethan answered with exaggerated cheer. "Merry Christmas." "Yes, everything's on schedule. Can't wait to see you." I sat in my displaced chair, surrounded by evidence of a celebration I hadn't chosen, drinking coffee from a mug that wasn't my favorite, watching my son and daughter-in-law transform my home into their vision of holiday entertainment. The day stretched ahead of me like a performance I'd never auditioned for, but was somehow expected to star in. Smile. Be gracious. Play the role of generous patriarch, while my savings account funded their social ambitions. Outside, the snow continued falling, blanketing the world in silence. The afternoon had felt endless. I'd retreated to my study after the kitchen discovery, trying to read, trying to focus on anything other than the elaborate performance being orchestrated in my own home. But the sounds of preparation filtered through every wall. Running water, clattering dishes, Sophia's voice directing some invisible production. The doorbell rang at exactly 6 o'clock. I rose from my chair, straightening my sweater, and walked to the front door. Through the frosted glass, I could see 2 figures bundled in winter coats. My hand hesitated on the doorknob for just a moment before turning it. Clarence. Mary Miller beamed at me, her arms laden with a covered dish and a bottle of wine wrapped in festive paper. Behind her, John stamped snow from his boots on the porch mat. "What a wonderful home. Thank you for inviting us." The words hit like a physical blow. "Thank you for inviting us to my own house. This is, of course, please come in." I stepped aside, forcing my face into what I hoped resembled warmth. Mary bustled past me into the foyer, John following with the quiet demeanor of an evening guest. "Clarence." They began removing their coats, and I took them automatically, hanging them in the hall closet I'd organized 30 years ago. As I arranged their winter wear beside my own jacket, I wondered when I'd become a guest in my own home. "Oh, it smells absolutely divine." Mary's voice carried from the living room. "Sophia must be an amazing cook." I followed them in, watching Mary's eyes take in the Christmas decorations, the family photos on the mantel, the carefully arranged furniture. Everything bore the marks of long habitation. My books on the shelves, my reading glasses on the side table, the throw pillows Eleanor had embroidered positioned exactly where I'd left them. "Actually, Sophia does the cooking," I said carefully. The doorbell chimed again. Evelyn Harper stood on the porch, a plate of homemade cookies balanced in her hands, her face bright with seasonal cheer. "Merry Christmas, dear." She stepped inside without waiting for invitation. the familiarity of a longtime neighbor. I brought my sugar cookies. Ethan said they were your favorites, Ethan said. When had my preferences been discussed with neighbors in conversations I wasn't part of? That's very thoughtful, I managed, taking the cookies and leading her to the living room. The space filled quickly with winter coats and cheerful voices. Victor Brown arrived last, carrying a case of beer and looking around appreciatively. Ethan, you've got a beautiful place here. He called toward the kitchen, though Ethan was nowhere to be seen. Thanks for having me. I moved through the room, offering drinks from my own bar cart, knowing instinctively where glasses were kept, which bottle of wine to uncork. Each action marked me as the home's owner, yet the guests' comments painted Ethan as host. You've decorated so beautifully for Christmas. Mary settled into the sofa, wine glass in hand. These ornaments look like family heirlooms. I've always loved the holidays in this house, I replied, the truth slipping out before I could stop it. John looked up from examining the family photos on the mantel. How long have you and Ethan lived here together? The question hung in the air like smoke. I felt every eye in the room turn toward me, waiting for an answer that would either maintain Ethan's fiction or expose it. Well, it's complicated, I said finally, before anyone could ask for clarification. Footsteps thundered down the stairs. Ethan appeared in the living room doorway, freshly showered and dressed in the expensive shirt I'd watched him buy last month with money he didn't have. Sorry I'm late getting down here. His voice boomed with artificial cheer. Hope Dad's been taking good care of you. Dad. Not Clarence. Dad. Positioning me as the subordinate, the helper, the secondary figure in this gathering. Clarence has been wonderful, Evelyn said warmly. Such a gracious host. Ethan's smile didn't waver, but something flickered behind his eyes. Well, he certainly knows his way around the house. The comment drew chuckles from guests who didn't understand its barb. Of course. I knew my way around the house. It was my house. Victor raised his beer in Ethan's direction. Great place you've got here, man. Must be nice having so much space. It has its advantages, Ethan replied, moving to claim the center of the room. Though it gets expensive maintaining a place like this. Expensive maintained with whose money exactly Mary noticed my silence. Clarence, you're awfully quiet. Are you feeling all right before I could answer? Sophia's voice cut through the conversation from the kitchen doorway. Dinner's ready. Everyone, come to the table. The announcement created a natural surge of movement. Guests rose, gathering their wine glasses. Following Sophia's gestures toward the dining room, I remained seated for a moment, watching Ethan shepherd people toward the elaborately set table, playing host in my home with my dishes. The dining room buzzed with appreciative comments about the formal setting, the centerpiece, the careful arrangement of 9 place settings around my oak table. I followed slowly, last in the procession, feeling like a stranger arriving at someone else's party. The dining room glowed with candlelight and Christmas warmth. My oak table, which had hosted countless family meals over 25 years with Eleanor, wore an elaborate cream tablecloth I'd never seen before. The good china, stored in the attic since Eleanor's funeral, gleamed under the chandeliers she'd picked out when we'd first bought the house. Guests gathered around the table, wine glasses in hand, voices bright with holiday cheer. Mary admired the centerpiece, while Victor complimented the formal setting. Everyone moved with that pleasant anticipation of a special meal, completely unaware they were witnessing the systematic erasure of my authority in my own home. I approached my usual chair at the head of the table, the seat I'd occupied for nearly 3 decades. where I'd carved Christmas turkeys and birthday cakes, where I'd helped Ethan with homework and discussed my day with Eleanor. My hand reached automatically for the familiar position. Ethan stepped directly into my path. Stop! The single word cut through the dinner party chatter like ice water. Conversations halted mid-sentence. Forks paused halfway to mouths. Every head turned toward us. You're not invited to this dinner table, freeloader. The silence that followed was so complete I could hear snow tapping against the windows. Victor's beer bottle stopped halfway to his lips. Mary's hand froze on her wineglass. Evelyn's mouth opened in a small, shocked circle. What did you just say? My voice came out quieter than I had intended, barely above a whisper. You heard me. Ethan's posture radiated confidence, feeding off the audience of shocked faces. We invited real guests tonight. Oh my. Mary's whispered words barely broke the silence. I stood frozen, hands still extended toward my chair, while my 38-year-old son blocked my path like a bouncer at an exclusive club. The room felt smaller suddenly, the walls pressing closer as every eye focused on this moment of public humiliation. Maybe we should, Evelyn started, her voice trailing off uncertainly. No, stay. Ethan's interruption was sharp, commanding. He needed to hear this. Sophia appeared in the kitchen doorway, dish towel in her hands, watching the scene unfold. When our eyes met, she gave an almost imperceptible nod, silent support for her husband's public degradation of his father. The Christmas tree lights from the living room cast colored shadows through the archway, red and green and gold dancing across faces frozen in disbelief. The formal table setting, my china, my silverware, my dining room, had become a stage for family warfare. John cleared his throat uncomfortably. Son, he's your father. A father who doesn't deserve respect. Ethan's voice rose, gaining strength from the shocked attention. All day long, he sits around, does nothing, acts like he owns the place, acts like I own the place, because I do own the place. Victor shifted in his chair, looking toward the front door like he was calculating escape routes. Maybe we should leave. Don't leave because of him. Ethan waved dismissively in my direction, treating me like an unwelcome intruder who'd crashed his party. This is our dinner party. Our dinner party in my house with my dishes purchased with my pension money. Mary reached toward Ethan's arm, her maternal instincts kicking in. Ethan, please. Maybe we shouldn't. It's Christmas. No. His response was sharp enough to make her flinch. He needs to know his place. All day long he sits around, does nothing, while I volunteer at the library, maintain the house, pay the bills, and subsidize their lifestyle with my retirement savings. The candles flickered in their crystal holders. Eleanor's candles from Eleanor's holders on Eleanor's table. She would have been horrified by this public spectacle, this violation of everything she'd taught Ethan about respect and family. Ethan! Evelyn's voice carried the weight of motherly disappointment. This is making everyone uncomfortable. He's made me uncomfortable for months. Ethan's gestures became more animated, feeding off the tension in the room. Living here like he owns the place. Living here like I own the place. The irony was so complete it almost made me laugh. Almost. The silence stretched between us, thick with shock and embarrassment. Around the table, my guests, no, Ethan's guests, sat frozen, trapped witnesses to a family meltdown they'd never expected when they'd accepted invitations to Christmas dinner. Sophia moved slightly in the doorway, still watching, still silent, still supporting her husband's performance through passive presence, I remained standing beside my displaced chair, every eye in the room focused on me, waiting for my response. The moment hung in the air like suspended breath, pregnant with possibility. The only sound was snow continuing to tap against windows and the soft hiss of candles burning down. The silence stretched until it became unbearable. I could feel 9 pairs of eyes watching me, waiting for my reaction to my son's public humiliation. Ethan stood beside my chair like a guard, chest puffed with artificial authority, feeding off the shocked attention of his audience. Mary reached across the table toward Ethan, her voice gentle but firm. "Ethan, please, maybe we shouldn't. It's Christmas." He jerked his arm away from her touch. "No, he needs to know his place. All day long he sits around, does nothing." John pushed back slightly from the table, his diplomatic instincts engaging. "Son, he's your father, a father who doesn't deserve respect." Ethan's voice carried across the dining room, bouncing off walls that had heard 42 years of family conversations. But never anything like this, living here like he owns the place. Evelyn shifted uncomfortably in her chair, her motherly features creased with concern. "This is making everyone uncomfortable. He's made me uncomfortable for months." Ethan spun toward the guests, treating them like a jury he needed to convince. "Every day I come home, and there he is sitting in my living room reading my books, watching my television. My living room, my books, my television." Each possessive pronoun was like a physical blow. Victor Brown set down his beer bottle with deliberate care, the small sound echoing in the tense silence. "Maybe we should leave." "Don't leave because of him." Ethan's voice cracked with desperation now, as if he sensed his performance wasn't convincing his audience. "This is our dinner party, our house, our life." But Mary wasn't buying it. Her eyes moved from Ethan to me, taking in my careful posture, my familiarity with the space, the way I naturally knew where everything belonged. "Clarence," she said quietly, "whose house is this?" The question hung in the air like a sword. Ethan's face flushed red. "We all live here together." "It's complicated." "No," Mary said, her voice gaining strength. "It's not complicated. Whose name is on the deed?" That doesn't matter," Ethan stammered, his confident facade cracking. John stood slowly, his height giving him authority in the suddenly charged room. "Ethan, you called your father a freeloader in what appears to be his own home at Christmas dinner. You don't understand." Ethan's voice rose to near shouting. "He acts like some generous patriarch, but he controls everything, every penny, every decision, every moment of our lives. Controls everything. While he and Sophia spent my money on designer clothes and elaborate dinner parties." Evelyn's voice cut through Ethan's mounting hysteria. "How long have you been living here? We're not." Ethan looked wildly between his guests, realizing his carefully constructed narrative was collapsing. 9 months. But it was supposed to be temporary. 9 months, Victor repeated slowly. Rent-free. Sophia finally spoke from the doorway, her voice barely above a whisper. "We're getting back on our feet." On whose feet Mary's question was surgical in its precision. Who pays the mortgage, the utilities, the food for this dinner? The questions came like arrows, each one finding its mark. Ethan's face cycled through emotions: anger, embarrassment, desperation, rage. He looked around the table at faces that had started the evening friendly and were now filled with dawning understanding. "You all don't understand." He exploded. It's not that simple. Life is complicated. What's complicated, John said quietly, is disrespecting your father in his own home in front of guests he didn't invite. Ethan's performance was unraveling thread by thread. The authority he tried to project through volume and aggression was being demolished by simple questions and quiet observations. He's controlling. He makes us feel like children. You're acting like children, Evelyn said, her grandmother's voice carrying the weight of decades watching family dynamics. Grown adults should pay their own way. The words hit Ethan like physical blows. His face contorted with fury. The mask of successful host completely abandoned now. Don't you lecture me. You don't know what it's like. I know what respect looks like, Mary said firmly. And this isn't it. Ethan whirled toward me. His finger pointed like a weapon. Look at him just standing there acting like the victim. I remained still, letting his words hang in the air, letting the guests see exactly who was creating this scene, who was destroying Christmas dinner with accusations and rage. The contrast was stark. Ethan's mounting hysteria against my controlled silence, his desperate justifications against my dignified stillness. The dining room had become a courtroom, and the jury was reaching its verdict. The dining room held its breath. Ethan stood triumphant beside my chair, chest heaving from his emotional performance, while 9 pairs of eyes waited for my response to his accusations. He'd painted me as the villain, the controlling patriarch, the burden in his narrative. I turned away from him completely. Freeloader. I spoke directly to the guests, my voice carrying the measured precision of 4 decades in engineering. Ethan, remind our guests who pays for this house. That's not important. His voice cracked slightly, the first hint that his confidence was manufactured. Who bought the food for tonight's dinner? I continued, still addressing Mary, John, Evelyn, and Victor, as if Ethan weren't worth acknowledging. Who pays the electricity keeping these lights on? The gas heating this room? The water in those wine glasses? John shifted uncomfortably in his seat. Mary's eyes moved from Ethan to me, pieces of a puzzle beginning to align. You're embarrassing yourself. Ethan's interruption sounded desperate now, less commanding. I gestured toward his feet. Those $350 sneakers you're wearing, are those my fault, too? Ethan's face flushed red. Stop it. The designer jeans, the expensive watch. My voice remained level, factual. 9 months of groceries, utilities, insurance premiums. Should I get the receipts? You don't understand. Ethan spun toward the guests, seeking allies who were no longer listening to him. He controls everything. Mary set down her wineglass with deliberate care. Ethan, whose name is on the deed to this house, the question landed like a physical blow. Ethan's mouth opened, closed, opened again. This is his house, Evelyn said quietly, the realization dawning in her voice. Isn't it? Victor looked around the dining room with new understanding. The family photos on the walls, all showing Clarence and Eleanor through decades of marriage, the careful organization, the settled comfort of long habitation. Everything pointed to one truth. How long have you been living here? John's question was surgical in its simplicity. 9 months, I answered when Ethan remained silent. Rent-free. They were supposed to stay a couple weeks until they got back on their feet. Sophia made a small sound from the kitchen doorway, somewhere between a gasp and a groan. A couple weeks, Mary repeated slowly. 9 months ago. The math was simple enough. The guests exchanged glances. Silent communications between married couples who'd spent decades reading each other's expressions. Ethan. Evelyn's voice carried the weight of maternal disappointment. You called your father a freeloader in his own home. You don't understand the situation. Ethan's voice rose again, but it sounded hollow now, echoing in a room that had turned against him. I understand perfectly, Victor said quietly. He looked at me with something approaching awe. You've been supporting them for 9 months. The silence that followed was different from before. Not shocked confusion, but dawning comprehension. The guests saw Ethan's expensive clothes with new eyes, understood the elaborate dinner preparations in a new context, recognized the careful way I moved through my own space. Those credit card bills you left on the kitchen counter. I continued, still speaking to the guests rather than to my son. $15,000 in debt while living in my house, eating my food, using my utilities. Ethan's face had gone pale now, the color draining as his carefully constructed narrative collapsed sentence by sentence. He makes us feel like children. Ethan tried one last desperate justification. You're acting like children, Mary said firmly. Grown adults should pay their own way. The words hit Ethan like a physical blow. He staggered slightly, looking around the table at faces that had started the evening friendly and were now filled with disgust. John stood slowly, his height giving him authority in the suddenly changed room. I think we've heard enough. The dining room that had begun the evening as a stage for Ethan's performance of successful hosting had become a courtroom, and the jury had reached its verdict. Ethan looked wildly between his guests, seeking support that was no longer there, understanding that his humiliation was now complete and public. This isn't over, he whispered, but the words carried no weight in a room that had already dismissed him. Ethan's whispered threat hung in the air for exactly 3 heartbeats before he exploded. His chair scraped violently against the hardwood as he shot to his feet, the sound like fingernails on a chalkboard. His fists slammed into the oak table, making dishes jump and wine glasses tremble. Enough. The word erupted from him with such force that Evelyn flinched backward. Mary's hand flew to her chest. Victor half rose from his seat, protective instincts engaging. Go to your room right now. The command was meant to humiliate me in front of the guests, to reassert dominance through volume and aggression. Ethan pointed toward the staircase like a parent disciplining a disobedient child. I remained perfectly still. The contrast was stark in the candle-lit dining room. Ethan's face red with rage, gesturing wildly while I stood calm and unmoved beside the chair he'd blocked me from. The guests sat frozen, witnessing something that went beyond family disagreement into the realm of public breakdown. John cleared his throat. Ethan, maybe you should know. Ethan whirled toward him, eyes wild. You don't understand. I'm the one in charge here. This is my house. But the words sounded hollow now, desperate. Everyone in the room knew the truth. Ethan. Mary's voice was soft, concerned. Please sit down. I won't sit down in my own dining room. He began pacing behind the chairs like a caged animal, hands clenched into fists. He sits there acting innocent, but he controls every penny, every decision, every moment of our lives. Sophia moved slightly in the kitchen doorway, torn between loyalty and horror at her husband's public meltdown. He needs to learn respect. Ethan's voice cracked on the last word. Go upstairs now. The silence that followed was profound. 9 people holding their breath, waiting to see how this moment would resolve. I waited until the echo of his shouting faded completely before I spoke. You have until morning to move out. My voice was quiet, measured. Final. No anger, no emotion, just simple statement of fact. The words hit Ethan like a physical blow. His mouth fell open. The pacing stopped. What? The question came out strangled. We're not going anywhere. You have until morning. You can't make us leave. I turned to face him directly for the first time since his outburst began. This is my house. The simplicity of the statement was devastating. No arguments, no justifications, no negotiations, just truth. Ethan's face cycled through emotions. Shock, rage, disbelief, panic. You can't. We don't have anywhere. It's Christmas. You should have thought of that before you called me a freeloader at my own dinner table. The guests sat transfixed, watching the complete destruction of Ethan's world in real time. Victor reached for his wife's hand under the table. Mary covered her mouth with her fingers and looked like she might cry. Please. Ethan's voice broke completely. Dad, please. We can talk about this. But I was already moving toward the staircase. My decision made and communicated. The dining room that had been a battlefield minutes earlier now felt like a courtroom after sentencing, until morning. I repeated it without looking back. Behind me, the silence stretched like a held breath, broken only by the soft sound of my footsteps on the stairs, and someone, maybe Sophia, beginning to cry. The Christmas dinner that Ethan had orchestrated to prove his authority had become his complete undoing, and it wasn't even 8 o'clock yet. The staircase creaked under my weight as I climbed away from the wreckage of Christmas dinner. Each step took me further from Ethan's breakdown and closer to the sanctuary of my bedroom. Behind me, the dining room had erupted into hushed, frantic conversation. Voices overlapping as guests tried to process what they'd witnessed. My bedroom door closed with a soft click, sealing me away from the chaos below. I stood for a moment with my back against the door, listening to the muffled sounds filtering up through the floor. Ethan's voice high and panicked, Sophia crying, the scrape of chairs as people moved. I removed my dinner jacket, hanging it carefully in the closet beside suits I'd worn to Eleanor's funeral, to Ethan's graduation, to retirement parties and birthday celebrations. The ritual of putting away formal clothes felt symbolic. Somehow, shedding the costume of a performance I'd never auditioned for. The chair by the window welcomed me like an old friend. From here, I could see the driveway, the street, the normal Christmas lights twinkling in neighbors' windows. The world outside continued its holiday celebration, oblivious to the family drama that had just imploded in my dining room. Car doors slammed in the driveway. Engines started. One by one, the guests were fleeing the disaster Ethan had created. I watched headlights sweep across the snow as Victor's car backed out, followed by John and Mary's sedan. Evelyn's porch light flickered on across the street as she hurried home, probably eager to distance herself from the evening's ugliness. The house grew quieter as the exodus continued. Downstairs, voices rose and fell. Ethan and Sophia having what sounded like an argument. Something crashed. Maybe a plate being slammed down too hard. Then Sophia's voice again, pleading, reasoning, trying to salvage something from the wreckage. 38 years I'd waited for him to act like an adult. 38 years of watching him take shortcuts, make excuses, expect others to clean up his messes. Eleanor had always believed he'd eventually mature, find his way. Give him time, she'd said. He'll figure it out. But time had run out. 9 months of supporting him financially, while he treated me like an intruder in my own home. 9 months of watching him spend money he didn't have while I clipped coupons to make ends meet. 9 months of being treated like the help in my own house. The snow continued falling outside, steady and silent. The Harrisons' inflatable Santa still waved mechanically from their front yard. Oblivious to human drama, Christmas would continue tomorrow, regardless of family feuds or eviction ultimatums. Around 9 o'clock, the house finally fell silent. No more arguing, no more crying, no more sounds of frantic activity. Either Ethan and Sophia had exhausted themselves, or they'd retreated to the guest room to plan their next move. I settled deeper into my chair, feeling something I hadn't experienced in months. Peace. The familiar comfort of my own space, my own thoughts, my own decisions without interference or judgment. Tomorrow would bring consequences. Ethan would test the ultimatum, probably believing I didn't have the resolve to follow through. He'd learned tonight that his public humiliation tactics had backfired spectacularly, but desperation might drive him to try other approaches. Let him try. I'd spent 42 years solving engineering problems, analyzing systems, finding solutions. Ethan had become a problem with a clear solution. Removal. The bedroom clock ticked past 10. Outside. The neighborhood had settled into Christmas night quiet. Porch lights dimmed, windows glowing softly with tree lights and family warmth. Normal families finishing normal celebrations. I'd have a normal Christmas again, starting tomorrow. The house creaked softly around me, settling into winter silence. Whatever sounds came from downstairs now were too faint to reach my sanctuary. For the first time in 9 months, I felt like I was home. The first thing I noticed when I woke was the silence. No running water from their bathroom. No footsteps overhead. No sounds of movement that had become the soundtrack of 9 months of unwanted cohabitation. 10 o'clock on the digital clock beside my bed. The deadline had passed 2 hours ago. I showered and dressed with deliberate care, choosing clothes that conveyed authority. Pressed slacks, collared shirt, the leather belt Eleanor had given me for our 20th anniversary. Every action felt ceremonial, preparing for a conclusion that had been inevitable since Ethan's first month of making excuses instead of progress. The staircase creaked under my weight as I descended into the aftermath of last night's disaster. Sunlight streamed through windows I hadn't bothered to close the curtains on, illuminating the wreckage of what was supposed to be Christmas dinner. Wine glasses sat abandoned on every surface, some still containing dregs of expensive wine purchased with my pension money. Plates with congealed gravy and cold turkey dotted the dining room table like evidence in a crime scene. The good china, Eleanor's china, looked violated somehow, stained with the residue of family warfare. Ethan's leather jacket hung over the back of my reading chair, the price tag of $250 etched in my memory from the day I'd watched him buy it. Sophia's cosmetics were scattered across the bathroom counter upstairs, her expensive face creams and serums claiming territory like a small invasion. I made coffee in a kitchen that still smelled of last night's turkey, listening for any sounds from the guest bedroom. Nothing. They were sleeping in, confident in their assumption that the old man had been bluffing. 38 years of watching me bend, compromise, and accommodate had taught them I was all bark and no bite. The morning felt different than yesterday's tense anticipation. No anxiety, no second guessing. The decision had crystallized during the night into something clean and final. They'd had their chance to leave with dignity. They'd chosen defiance instead. I settled at the kitchen table with my coffee, positioning myself with a clear view of the hallway leading to their bedroom. The house felt larger somehow, as if removing the weight of their presence had opened up space I'd forgotten existed. Through the window, I could see the Harrisons across the street hanging Christmas lights they'd apparently forgotten to put up before the holiday. Normal people having normal problems, not hosting adult children who called them freeloaders in their own homes. The coffee was good. The expensive blend Ethan had insisted on buying. Another small irony in a situation full of them. I'd drink the rest of it after they were gone. A small victory toast with ingredients purchased using my generosity and thrown back in my face. Clock hands moved with mechanical precision toward 11. Still no sounds from upstairs. Still no acknowledgement that they'd missed the deadline. Still no signs of packing or preparation. Their silence was its own form of communication. A bet that I lacked the resolve to follow through on my ultimatum. They were about to learn how expensive that bet would prove to be. At exactly 11 o'clock, floorboards creaked overhead, the sound of feet hitting the floor, muffled conversation, the toilet flushing. Finally, awake and probably discussing strategy for managing the aftermath of last night's explosion, I remained seated with my coffee, waiting, patient as I'd been for 9 months. But with an entirely different purpose now. Ethan appeared at the bottom of the stairs, wearing the silk pajamas Sophia had given him for his birthday. $80 pajamas. I remembered the receipt. His hair was disheveled, but his posture carried the casual confidence of someone who believed the storm had passed. Morning. Dad. He padded into the kitchen, bare feet slapping against tiles I'd installed myself 15 years ago. Coffee smells good. I watched him pour a cup using the mug Eleanor had painted in her ceramics class, the one with "World's Best Husband" in her careful script. Another small violation in a series of violations. Sleep well, I asked, eventually. He leaned against the counter, affecting the pose of someone who belonged there. Last night got pretty heated. You know how holidays can be. Everyone's stressed, emotions running high. The dismissal was practiced, polished, reduced the previous evening's public humiliation to holiday stress, family tensions. Nothing more serious than a disagreement over football teams or dinner timing. Pretty heated. I repeated. Exactly. But it's Christmas morning. Well, the day after Christmas. He gestured with his mug toward the living room where wrapping paper from gifts they'd bought with my money still littered the floor. Time to move past it. You know, family's family, family's family. The phrase that had covered 9 months of financial exploitation and emotional manipulation. So, everything's fine now? I asked. Of course. It's fine. Ethan settled into the chair across from me, comfortable in his assumption that yesterday's consequences had evaporated with dawn's light. We had a fight. Happens to everyone. Everything's fine now. I took a sip of coffee, studying his face over the rim, confident, relaxed, already planning how to smooth over the damage with his friends who'd witnessed his meltdown. The art of making problems disappear through charm and selective memory. Fine will be when you've moved out. The words dropped into the kitchen like stones into still water. Ethan's confident expression flickered just for a moment before reassembling itself. Dad, come on. You can't be serious about that deadline nonsense. I'm completely serious. He laughed, the sound forced and hollow. It's been what? 14 hours. You expect us to pack up our entire lives and find a new place overnight. I expected you to start packing last night. Where exactly are we supposed to go? It's the day after Christmas. Nothing's open. Nowhere to look for apartments. His tone shifted toward the reasonable, the practical. Be realistic here. I stood carrying my empty mug to the sink and turned to face him. You had 9 months to make other arrangements. We've been trying. We've been looking. The lie came smoothly. Practiced. The job market is tight. Rental prices are insane. We need more time. You've had time. Ethan's facade began to crack around the edges. So, what are you going to do if we don't leave? What's your big plan? I reached for the phone hanging on the kitchen wall, the same spot where it had hung for 20 years. Ethan's eyes followed the movement, his confident posture shifting slightly. You'll see, Dad. This is ridiculous. You can't make us leave. His voice rose, the reasonable mask slipping to reveal the panic underneath. We're family. My hand closed around the phone receiver. Ethan stared at me, finally beginning to understand that his practiced manipulations weren't working, that the old patterns of guilt and obligation had been permanently broken. Stop, he said quietly. Just stop and think about this. But I'd been thinking about it for 9 months. I'd been thinking about it all night. The time for thinking was over. The police arrived in exactly 23 minutes. Faster response time than I'd expected for a civil matter. 2 officers, one younger with close-cropped hair, one older with the patient demeanor of someone who'd handled domestic disputes for decades. Sir, we received a call about a property dispute. The older officer stood on my front porch, notepad ready, professional, but not unfriendly. Yes, officer. I need assistance removing unauthorized occupants from my home. I held out the folder I'd prepared. Deed, mortgage statements, utility bills, all in my name. These individuals have been living here without lease or rental agreement, and have refused to leave when asked. Ethan appeared behind me in the hallway, still in those expensive pajamas, his face pale with disbelief. Officer, this is crazy. This is my father. We had a family argument. The younger officer examined my documentation, while his partner listened to Ethan's protests. Property ownership wasn't complicated. Either your name was on the papers, or it wasn't. Sir, are you the sole owner of this property? The older officer asked me. Yes. My late wife and I purchased it in 1990. It's been fully paid off for 15 years, and these individuals have been residing here without your permission, initially with permission as temporary guests. That arrangement ended last night. I asked them to leave by this morning. They refused. The officers exchanged glances. The kind of professional communication that comes from years of dealing with family drama that crosses legal lines. Sir, the older officer addressed Ethan. You need to gather your belongings and leave the premises. This is insane. He can't just kick us out. We've been living here for 9 months. The property owner has the right to remove unauthorized occupants. You have no lease agreement or rental contract establishing tenancy rights. Sophia appeared at the top of the stairs, wrapped in a bathrobe that cost more than my monthly electric bill. Her face was swollen from crying, makeup smeared from last night's disaster. How long do we have? She asked quietly. I'd recommend gathering essential items now, the older officer replied. You can arrange for remaining belongings later if necessary. The next hour played out with mechanical efficiency. Ethan alternated between furious protests and desperate bargaining, but legal authority wasn't something he could charm or manipulate. The officers supervised as boxes and suitcases emerged from the guest bedroom. As Sophia gathered cosmetics from the bathroom, as 9 months of gradual invasion was reversed in 60 minutes. Neighbors emerged onto porches and peered through windows. Suburban curiosity drawn by official vehicles and public drama. Mrs. Hargrove from 3 houses down walked her dog past my driveway twice, clearly gathering intelligence for the neighborhood network. This isn't over, Ethan hissed as he loaded the last box into their car. You think you've won something here, but this isn't over. The threat hung in the winter air like visible breath, but it carried no weight behind police presence and legal documentation. Have a safe trip, son. Their car backed out of my driveway for the last time, Ethan gunning the engine in a final gesture of impotent rage. The officers completed their paperwork, advised me about restraining orders if harassment continued, and departed with professional courtesy that treated me as what I was, a property owner exercising legitimate rights. The house settled into silence as their car disappeared around the corner. I stood in my living room, surrounded by the debris of Christmas dinner, but free of the weight that had pressed down on my life for 9 months. On the coffee table, Ethan's expensive watch sat forgotten, probably worth more than most people's weekly salary. I picked it up, feeling its weight, then walked to the front door and set it on the porch. Let him come back for it if he wanted it badly enough. The afternoon sun streamed through windows that were mine again, into rooms that belonged to me again, across floors where I could walk without justifying my presence. The silence wasn't empty. It was full of possibility. Tomorrow I'd start cleaning up the damage. Tonight I'd simply enjoy being home. As the sun dipped low, casting golden hues across the empty rooms, I poured a glass of that forgotten wine, the one they'd left behind. The taste was richer now, untainted by resentment. For the first time in 9 long months, I breathed deeply, the air crisp with promise. Eleanor would have smiled at this quiet victory, her gentle wisdom echoing in the stillness. No more shadows in my sanctuary, just me, reclaiming every corner, every memory. Tomorrow, I'd call old friends, maybe even visit the library with fresh eyes. Life, it seemed, was ready to unfold again, page by unhurried page. If you enjoyed Clarence's story of boundaries and quiet strength, hit that like button and subscribe for more tales of family, resilience, and unexpected turns. Share your thoughts in the comments below. What would you have done at that dinner table? Let's discuss and connect. Your questions spark our next adventures together. To hear the following story, click the box on the left. Thank you for joining me tonight.